Hi, everyone. Welcome back. In this session, we're going to be talking about the modern analytics tech stack. So a quick overview of the different software tools that are powering modern analytics teams. So my name is Anna Carmichael. I'm a senior solution architect on our team here at Civis. I joined in 2019 after being a client for 2018. I then focused most of my time in 2019 and early 2020 on our presidential primary clients before being embedded on the Biden analytics team for the general election and the Georgia runoff. In 2021, I've been thawing out from that entire election experience and bringing back any lessons we've learned from a really incredible analytics team throughout the general to our political and nonprofit clients, honestly, even as well as our government and commercial clients. A fun fact about me is that my first 3 concerts were all the Fray on accident, which is, I'm from Colorado, they're from Colorado, and first one was a birthday party that I went to with my friends in 7th grade. Then they did a little pop-up show in my neighborhood, and so we went to that one, and then my parents wanted to go see them at Red Rock. So all 3 on accident were the Fray. They gave the same concert every single time, I can assure you of that. Like I said, we're going to talk about the modern analytics tech stack. So your goal as an analytics team is to provide an opportunity to make data-driven decisions. So doing that means creating a feedback loop between analytics teams and the rest of the organization. And that starts with a collaborative relationship with teams at your organization that are collecting this first-party data. Hopefully, someone on the analytics team has an equitable relationship with these other teams that are doing outreach, whether that's organizing, fundraising, digital, et cetera. So those teams are not only collecting data in their work, but they're also building universes, they're creating audiences, and they're trying to decide how to optimize their time, which is really where you all come in. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk a little bit about the data mindset in working with some common tools that are used to collect this first-party data, because again, hopefully as analytics practitioners, you're involved in those conversations. And then I'm also going to talk about the analytics-specific tools that will allow you to make the most of the data that the other teams are collecting and create collaborative ecosystems that will help all the teams use this data more efficiently. So organizations are in different phases of this. Just as a heads up, if you don't have all these things, don't worry about it. Most organizations start with a CRM, so that's where we're going to start. And then I'll explain a little bit about how we're going to zigzag all over the place and hopefully get back to this flower at the very end. So as this framework develops, I'm going to talk about the purpose and what it's good for, the users that you should be thinking of when you're thinking of getting these tools and how they're being used. Things to keep in mind, especially in terms of collaboration, that's a theme you'll hear me continue to hammer on, and how you can make sure that these all work together to become this stack. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll go through some Q&A. So I will go ahead and get started with the CRM. So the CRM is a customer relationship management tool. Some examples of this that you might be familiar with are VAN, the Voter Activation Network, which is used by political and nonprofit clients often. Salesforce is another example. The purpose of a CRM is for tracking person-level interactions. It's not a database, even though sometimes it's used as a database. I was an organizer. I got told many a time that if it's not in VAN, it doesn't exist, and was really forced on this source of truth. But it's not a database. It's not designed for storage. It's not designed for querying or analysis. It's designed for users to be able to retain information that the organization finds valuable. So it might have some light tooling in it for analysis, but really it's designed to track information that folks on your team are, your larger team, are interacting with people, whether that's voters, whether that's volunteers, whomever, to track that kind of information. So the kind of users that are using CRMs are typically non-technical users. They're account managers, organizers, front of the house type of folk that are really representing your organization on the front lines, having these one-to-one conversations where they're trying to just keep, who's the best, what's the best email for this person, what's the best phone number, that kind of thing. So the things to really keep in mind here, besides compatibility, I'm going to hammer on compatibility a lot, I'll get there, is usability. Your users really need to be able to put data into this tool easily. If they don't find it easy to put a cell phone number into this tool or to edit an email address or something like that, they're not going to do it. And therefore, your organization won't be able to retain really valuable information about these people. So it's important that that tool has this usability mindset and that you're thinking about retention. The other really important thing collectively as an organization is that you're having good conversations about what your metrics are and that you're re-emphasizing those metrics in the deliberate reporting that your team is delivering based on what's going on in CRM and what's going on in these other tools. So can the relevant data be stored in this tool? Like, for example, if one of your metrics is contact attempts, you want to make sure that contact attempts can be easily stored in this tool, that the number of calls can be stored, that the number of texts can be stored, that all of those sort of dates and the relevant information, who contacted them, can be stored in this tool. And it's important to sort of onboard new users of the tool with a reporting mindset. So if they're sort of seeing the source of truth for how successful they are, be a report that your team is making coming out of the CRM that re-emphasizes contact attempts, and they understand where in the tool that's being pulled from, they're going to be more incentivized to put that information in properly. So one example of this is like again, contact attempts. You could write contact attempts into a note of a person. You could have somebody go in there and say, I talked to Janice today and we had a really lovely conversation, and it's typed into the note. But that's not something that the data team can then pull out and track as like one contact attempt, right? So it's important to really emphasize in your metrics and your reporting where users of the tool, of the CRM, should be putting their effort so that they're capturing this relevant information in the right places. Secondly, or lastly, is exportability. So we're going to get to a place where we want to be able to take this information, again, out of the tool because it's not designed as a database. It's not designed as a reporting tool. We want to be able to export it and be able to then analyze it, leverage it, and report on it. So you want to make sure that your CRM has the ability to export data out of it. The next slide here talks about my ideal world. So in an ideal world, an organization almost immediately then is able to start thinking about how to extract and store data from their CRM, what tools will best empower their analytics team. They start considering compatibility in other tool selections because they understand the value of the data that's being stored on the CRM for their other programs, for their outreach programs and marketing programs, et cetera. This is usually the path for modern campaigns because they know the punchline. They have the money from the jump and they're starting from scratch, and they know that they're going to need this in the long run. So they call to get a database, to get an analytics workbench in the same breath as they're getting a CRM and their other tools. But in a realistic world, most organizations, especially in the nonprofit space, scale in other ways. So they might have already had marketing tools, outreach tools before they're thinking about a database, before they're thinking about an analytics workbench, just because analytics workbenches maybe didn't exist when they first started picking their outreach tools or when they first started picking their CRMs. Excuse me. So because of this, it means that passing this information along from one source to another is usually happening as a CSV, something manual. It isn't really a large-scale operation. The programs continue on, but it's somewhat siloed. And so for a lot of existing organizations, nonprofits, governments, commercial clients, state parties, et cetera, they've had marketing tools and outreach tools before, but they haven't necessarily thought about bringing them together. So we're going to get to the cherry on top of bringing them together later. But for now, let's just keep talking about the data mindset for these other first-party collection tools, digital organizing, and outreach tools. So back to a realistic world, adjacently to a CRM, it's that digital organizing and outreach tools are being used for a personalized call to action. So the personalized piece here is pretty important, and they're actionable tools. They're typically designed with a particular contact medium in mind. So texting, email, phone calls, door knocking, et cetera. They're designed with that sort of personalized one-on-one experience and thinking about what sort of information you gather in each of those kinds of mediums. So it's an outreach tool. It's not the source of truth. It's not a CRM. It's not a database. It's designed, again, for that particular medium to be able to retain information typically gathered in that situation. The users here, again, are non-technical volunteers, organizers, digital staffers. They're really well trained in having these conversations and retaining this information and getting through the script, not necessarily analysts. So some things to keep in mind are compatibility with your database and your workbench. Always going to be true. We're going to get there. I keep saying that, but we are going to get there. And we want to get to a place. The reason that I keep talking about that is because we want to get to a place where this data isn't just living in this tool and it's not just being exported out of CSVs and then moved back into a CRM. We want to get to a place where you are automating list loading into this tool, automating results extracting from this tool, And that really requires that compatibility with that database and that workbench. And these are typically tools, unlike the CRM, where you might just have one CRM, where you're often layering a lot. So a lot of our organizations, clients that we work with, maybe have 5, 6, 7 different digital outreach tools. And so especially as they start to layer on the newer ones that they can start thinking more about this compatibility, more about this modernization of automation, of list loading and results extracting, et cetera. The other just quick tips to keep in mind here are billing is an important and interesting, different framework for these kinds of tools. Cost per connection versus all you can use. Talk to your vendors about this, see what they can help you with, especially as you start to scale around particular events on your calendar. And think about scalability. Start planning for, if I had a magic wand and I wasn't having to do all of this manually, what else would I be able to do with this tool? Since most of these tools are designed for one-on-one contact, you can typically personalize your message a little bit more. So you're already putting in the effort to reach out to each person. How can you customize that message? I know Haley's talked to you a little bit about message testing. We'll talk about that more in the marketing, larger scale advertising pieces. But think about your customized message. How can you use information from your CRM to customize these volunteer recruitment texts, for example? You can use this previous volunteer history that you're storing in a CRM to be able to change your script a little bit to something like, we know you've supported us before by volunteering, and we want to ask you to do it again, to a list of people that have already volunteered, versus something like, we know that you've supported us by being a donor or by sharing our Facebook post, but we now want you to also volunteer because that is the most effective way for us to get people to sign this petition or to go vote, et cetera. So think about how you can start to scale those subgroups, because as you're going to get more efficient with using a database, using analytics workbench, you're going to free up some time to be able to hopefully customize your messages even more. So marketing tools, I'm defining these a little bit this is sort of my definition, so take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. As distinct from these one-on-one tools, these are one-to-many tools. So this is things like MailChimp, things that you can do email blasts on, social media, et cetera. It's less personalized and you're casting more of a wide net. Usually these tools are most frequently used by, again, some non-technical users, digital teams, comms teams, marketing teams, et cetera. And some big things to keep in mind here are testing whenever, wherever. I know Haley talked to you all about the value of testing, but you're sending these messages out to really large groups, and it's important to be testing those so that you're making the most of that broadcasted wide net and making the most of that experience and that money. It's also important to think about the insights that these audiences might already have baked into these tools. So what can you feed into the tool to make the most of those? So Facebook audiences is probably a good example of this. What sort of information can you be feeding into to the Facebook advertising platforms to be able to best inform the tool, best create your audiences? And what insights can you take back from these tools? So oftentimes we see teams that will spend a ton of time in emphasizing the universe that they're creating, but then they aren't necessarily getting all the reactions back or getting all of the data out of the tool. And because they're just thinking, well, I've already run the ad, so why would I need that information? But what we really want to drive towards here is pulling that information out of these tools so that you can use that for other opportunities, for other tools. What sort of information are you getting? Are they opening this? Are they opening their email? That's a helpful piece of information to know of if they're on their phone, what time were they on their phone? Is that a good time to call them? Is that a good time to text them? How can you think about retaining those insights for the ability to create groups for other parts of the program? So big pivot here from away from tools that are being used to collect this data that are being used probably by other parts of the organization. And now I don't know if you can see my slight subtle color indicators here, but now we've crossed over into tools that are probably owned by the data and analytics team. And ideally, though the analytics team was involved in those other tools, has a conversation with them, is extracting data, pushing audiences, et cetera. These are really tools that are part of the traditional data staffer role, these reporting tools. This is where people really start to see the beginning of a data staffer role here. So I'm going to switch this a little bit because the users are important, and then the purpose and the things to keep in mind really flow together, I think. So the competencies for visualization tools can often be a good entry point for data staffers. So you might find some people are doing some crossover into, learning how to use Tableau. They might not necessarily be a data scientist or know R, know Python, et cetera, but they can figure out Tableau, and it's sort of an entryway for them. So it is somewhat technical, and it can also be, your most technical people. There are absolute legends when it comes to reporting, for sure, but it is a little bit more digestible usually in using these tools than some of the other like database access, et cetera. So when it comes to purpose and what it's good for, one thing to really keep in mind here is that visibility tools are fun. People like the outputs. They like the fact that these tools make inaccessibly large data sets digestible for people. If I had a dime for every time someone asked me for a heat map, for those technical people on the call, they meant a chloropleth, but just because they like seeing this info on a map, they felt like it was accessible and valuable. It's really important that we, use these tools to surface themes in the data, but it's also important that we're cautious as practitioners. So making sure that you're calling out the work, calling out the point of the work before doing the work. It's fine to use things like pivot tables to understand themes, and especially as you're starting to just digest your data, understand new data sets. But as a practitioner, you want to make sure you're not taking something that you were just using to understand the theme and giving it to folks that are going to go base a whole program around it, spend money on it. These visibility tools are really great because they take something that's really complicated that people would have otherwise come, sat down with you, had a really long conversation about, and they take them and digest them. It gives them something for them to understand, and they feel like they can walk away from a slide, a map, a graph, and understand it. So it's important that you take that as both a blessing and a risk, and really take that intention seriously. Vet the understanding of your visibility tools as much as possible before money gets allocated based on them, so that you can make sure that they're being interpreted properly and that people are really understanding them well. It's a really helpful tool to sort of crystallize these opportunities for action, right? So making it clear what, again, where your metrics fall in and which kind of visualization, whether it's a map, a pie chart, a bar graph, whatever it might be, can really emphasize the metrics where you are in your progress and define those outcomes. Hopefully you're having these conversations as data practitioners with organizing, digital, fundraising, et cetera, and that you've collectively defined these outcomes, because if you want the people to sign a petition, you need to make sure that it's not just, oh, this is really pretty, but is this the best way to reflect progress on your team's metrics? So define those outcomes and make sure that the takeaway is clear. I used to show some stuff to my mom before I would show it to the governor, so I made sure that it was really clear what I was saying before he went up and said something, based on this thing that I had made, and wanted to make sure that that was super clear. So the last thing I want you all to keep in mind is around update cadence. How often does this really need to update? People will often come to data teams and really talk about they want these things to update constantly. I'm going to push back on that a little bit, because I try to always question, how often are people really going to be able to make decisions on this? How often are you really going to be able to change course? And you want to make sure, I know there's probably some conversations that have already happened about data engineers, but you want to make sure your analytics staffers are not focusing so much on optimizing, and that they're really able to focus on the analysis and the quality of the work, and that you are not focusing on just sort of arbitrarily making these things as fast as possible. The last piece, if you haven't used Tableau, I know I'm running out of time here for a second, so I've about 2 more minutes of slides, so I'm going to skip my last geospatial data. If you have questions about that, we can talk about that in the chat. So the last piece of the analytics puzzle here is the data warehouse. So just a step before the punchline, the data warehouse is truly just for storage. It's designed to store a variety of data sets. It gets you one step closer to breaking down those silos because everything's in one place. It's used by technical users, analysts, data engineers, data scientists, et cetera, that have this interest and ability to leverage things all being in one place. But it's just for storage. So you want to make sure it's compatible with everything, and you want to make sure it's secure. Those are the really important pieces, that things can be stored there and that it's secure for obvious reasons there. The punchline here is the analytics workbench, which sits on top of the data warehouse and is designed for analysts and data science to unearth these insights and to make the most of having this data in one place. So the distinction here, I think, is really important. Oftentimes the warehouse and the workbench get conflated. And sometimes that's actually a good thing. For those of you who are Citus platform users, you might not even know that you have a Redshift cluster that we provide you, that you platform is sitting on top of, and that stores all of your data. And that just means the compatibility between the warehouse and the workbench is seamless, which is what you want. The workbench is designed to empower these analysts to maximize insights. But if you don't have any access to that data, so if you don't have the warehouse, how can you really do that? And if you have it all stored in one place, so you just have the warehouse without the workbench, that's just only as helpful as it is to access it and to understand it. So the workbench, again, is designed to specifically make the work of the analytics team happen. It's also intended to have tooling to cut universes, create lists, build models, those big outputs from the analytics team. And analysts, one thing to really sort of keep in mind in these section of things to keep in mind is analysts really aren't robots. They should have access to understand the program so that they can find opportunities to optimize. They can find opportunities to leverage different parts of your data sources for different parts of the program. And it's going to help them gut check and innovate even further if they're able to really understand what the program needs are and what the goal of this process is. So last but not least, the value of the stack, as we call it. So the stack is really a combination of all of these things. It's a user-friendly CRM. It's compatible outreach tools. It is coupled then with an effective analytics workbench that sits on top of a compatible data warehouse that enables you to create a holistic view of your organization, your supporters, and your outreach programs. So it allows you to get this 360 view, breaking down these silos, which is really made possible by this workbench because it enables what I like to call all context. For those of you that have done the campaign, we know what all context is. It enables this optimization and informs your models. So what do I mean by all context? I mean the ability to say for a given person, all the ways in which your organization has interacted with them and what the results were. So a data set that allows you to understand the effort being made by all the teams, the results of those efforts, and being able to consolidate all those different kinds of first-party data not only helps you to cut lists, to reduce overlap, a fan favorite, which is make people happy, which is that they are only getting one call a day now instead of one from each team. Though, quick caveat on that, we've done some research on that. We've shown that you can't contact people out of doing the action that you want, but it does make people feel happy. It makes your stakeholders feel good. And so not only are you really able to do all of that, but you're able to start building real data science products from these tools that you can now not only push audiences back, which means these teams are now doing their outreach in a data-driven way, but you, the analytics team, have completed that feedback loop by breaking down those silos, reducing that overlap, and informing your models. So I'm gonna go ahead and pause for questions and see what we have there, but I hope that this was helpful.
Anna, thank you. You have packed quite a powerful punch in 25 minutes. Trying to think about where to start. So let's start. We do have some questions that have come in through the chat.
Sure.
And want to get to those. But I do want to start here before we dive into those questions, because you did pack in so much information. For an organization that is just getting started, and maybe they have a CRM and they're thinking about next steps, what's your best piece of advice to get to that full-on workbench? What's the next step for them?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like, building an analytics, like getting a database, building an analytics workbench, when you only have like one main data source, feels kind of like duplicative potentially. Like this is just a mirror and a different tool, right? But the reason that I would recommend that is because, sure, you could go the route of getting a texting tool, getting an email tool, getting whatever the thing is next. But if you're able to, you're going to make the most of that email tool, that texting tool, that calling tool, whatever it might be, if you're really able to start thinking already about overlap, thinking about automating. So what I mean by that is being able to set up automated workflows to pull that data out of the CRM, to cut lists based on the voter file, the consumer file, whatever other data sources you might have that maybe aren't even in the CRM, but you probably have access to. and informing those other outreach tools. So I think that, maybe 1 or 2 outreach tools is probably, there's certain situations where it's easier to get somebody to sign off on that than to sign off on an analytics workbench. So I don't want to say like, don't go get a texting tool, but I think as much as you can, thinking about how you can make the most of any of those tools, the real answer there is by breaking down silos, sharing data across different tools, and by empowering your analytics team to do their jobs, which is to help you reduce overlap and to optimize. And they're going to be able to do that in a tool designed for them to do that.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, one of the other questions that I think is a little bit deeper, I feel like you've touched on it, but I do want to ask it just to make sure that there's clarity for the person that asked is, can you clarify the difference between reporting tools and an analytics workbench? I feel like you just answered that, but can you kind of restate that, please?
I was going fast towards the end, so definitely happy to clarify that. So a data visibility tool or like a reporting tool is something like Tableau, Google Data Studio, something like that, that's designed to build something pretty and visual and like absorb different kinds of data sets and to churn out some visual that helps with that analysis. The workbench connects to those so that it can feed data sets into the back end of those reports so that it can power that reporting. But it's not designed for visibility, right? Like that's not the goal of the tool. The goal of the tool for an analytics workbench is to be able to import the first party data that you're getting in an automated way, in a scalable way. It's always going to be about automation because we want analysts to be analysts. We want them to be able to be looking at the things that they're making and really, writing release notes, writing good emails, having good conversations with people who are consuming these reports, not just being so busy on, piecing together the CSVs and, like manually uploading data and moving stuff around. I see one of these questions here in the chat about investing in data infrastructure. This is really the case, in my opinion, is, look, I have these folks on my team that are analysts, and I can either have them, help move data around, right? And try to back this report, which can only update once a week because it takes so much manual work. Or I can invest in this data infrastructure, this analytics workbench, which again is designed for getting all the data in one place, quickly transforming that data, analyzing that data in a very, not in a non-visual way, like in just top lines, querying, et cetera, to then be able to build these visualizations, to build the 2 main outputs that I would argue are coming out of the analytics team, which is models and like list cutting audiences, et cetera, and reporting. And that's what the analytics workbench is designed for, is being able to get everything you need to do that work, and then to get those into the tools designed for that. So getting those lists back into the outreach tool so that the outreach teams are, doing their work on data-driven lists, that getting that data back into the reporting tools so that those reports are backed by data that was, brought in quickly, transformed quickly, and exported quickly into those tools. And so focusing really on this analytics workbench as the hub and investing in the hub allows your analysts to be analysts, and it allows the rest of the team to sort of do their job without even really knowing how data-driven they are, because it's seamless behind the scenes. So I think that's also quite literally, the justification, because the CRM isn't designed to do those things in an automated way. It's designed to maybe export CSVs when you need it, but that still means somebody's waking up at 6 a.m., taking that CSV and trying to transform it in, Google Sheets or in Excel and then put it into an outreach tool. And that's not what your analysts are hired for.
Well, Anna, I feel like we could use another half an hour, but unfortunately we're out of time.
No problem.
Thank you so much for sharing. And for those of you that do have additional questions for Anna, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure that we get your questions answered. Thank you so much. And we will close this session and move on to an Intro to Civis platform. Thank you.